What if I told you the price of petrol in your city, the value of your currency, even wars in the Middle East, are all connected by one invisible system? Not stocks, not banks, not even governments. A system so powerful that if it cracks, the global economy doesn't slow down. It shifts. And right now, with tensions rising around Iran and threats to the Strait of Hormuz, that system is under pressure again. So here's the real question. Is this just another conflict, or the beginning of a financial reset? To answer that, you need to understand one word. Petrodollar. Let's start simple. Oil isn't just fuel. It's the backbone of modern civilization. Over 100 million barrels of oil are consumed every single day. Around 90% of global transportation runs on petroleum. Plastics, chemicals, fertilizers all depend on oil. Even your food supply indirectly depends on oil. Now think about it. If oil stops flowing, what happens? Transport stops. Supply chains collapse. Prices explode. We've already seen a preview. In 1973, during the oil crisis, prices jumped nearly 4x. Inflation surged, economies stalled. Now imagine that happening today in a hyperconnected global economy. And here where things get interesting. Because oil isn't just important. It's controlled. But here's the twist. It's not oil itself that gives power. It's the currency used to buy it. And that changes everything. How the dollar took control. To understand this, we go back to 1944. World War II is ending, Europe is destroyed, Japan is devastated. But the US? Its economy is booming. So at a meeting called Bretton Woods, countries made a deal. The US dollar would become the center of global finance. And here why people trusted it. Because the US promised. You can exchange dollars for gold. So currencies around the world started linking themselves to the dollar. This made the dollar not just a currency, but the anchor of the entire system. The Nixon Shock. Then came 1971. Everything changed. President Nixon made a sudden decision. He ended the dollar's link to gold. Just like that. No warning, no transition. This was called the Nixon Shock. Now the dollar wasn't backed by gold anymore. It became fiat money value based on trust, not assets. That should have weakened the dollar. But it didn't. In fact, it became even stronger. Why? Because right after losing gold, the US found something far more powerful to back its currency. Not metal, but energy. The petrodollar deal. In 1973, another crisis hit. The OPEC oil embargo. Oil-producing countries cut supply to the West. Prices skyrocketed. The US realized something dangerous. If it didn't control oil trade, it couldn't control the global economy. So it made a deal with Saudi Arabia. Simple but genius. Saudi Arabia would sell oil only in US dollars. In return, the US would provide military protection and security. And because Saudi Arabia was the biggest exporter, other countries followed. Now think about what that means. No matter who you are. India, Japan, Germany, Pakistan. If you want oil, you need dollars first. How the system actually works. Let's break it down like a loop. Every country needs oil. Oil is priced in dollars. So countries must hold dollars. To get dollars, they trade with the US or buy US assets. That creates constant global demand for the dollar. And demand equals power. This gives the US three massive advantages. It can borrow cheaply, low interest rates. It can print money without immediate collapse. It can control global finance through sanctions. Look at Iran. When the US imposed sanctions, Iran was cut off from the dollar system. Result: trade collapsed. Currency crashed. Inflation skyrocketed. That's not just economic pressure. That's financial warfare. But here's the crazy part. The system doesn't just give the US power. It also feeds itself. Like a loop that never ends. Petrodollar recycling. When oil countries sell oil, they earn billions in dollars. What do they do with that money? They don't just store it. They reinvest it. Mostly back into the US. US Treasury bonds. Real estate. Stocks. Infrastructure. This is called petrodollar recycling. So the cycle looks like this. Oil buyers right arrow pay dollars right arrow. Oil producers right arrow receive dollars right arrow. They invest in the US right arrow. Dollar demand stays strong. The cycle repeats. At one point, oil exporting nations held hundreds of billions in US Treasury securities. This helped the US fund its deficits without collapsing its currency. Think about that. Other countries are literally financing the US economy because they have to use its currency. But if this system is so powerful, why are countries trying to break away from it? And more importantly, what happens if they succeed? Rising tensions in today's context. Now bring this to today. Tensions around Iran are rising again. The Strait of Hormuz, a narrow waterway, handles nearly 20% of global oil supply. If that gets blocked, oil prices don't just rise. They spike. And when oil spikes, inflation follows. Markets panic. Currencies weaken. Now connect the dots. If oil supply is disrupted, and countries panic, and they rush to secure energy, demand for dollars surges again. Unless they find an alternative. Because behind the scenes, something big is already happening. Countries like China and Russia aren't just watching. They're preparing. Quietly. Strategically. And if they succeed, the system that's controlled the world for 50 years could start to crack. So here's the real question. Is the petrodollar dying or evolving? And why are even US enemies still forced to use it? We'll break that down next. Why countries can't just leave the dollar. So if the petrodollar system gives the US this much power, why don't countries just walk away? Why not switch to euros, yuan, or even gold? Sounds simple. It's not. Because the global financial system isn't just about currency. It's about infrastructure. Every oil contract, every shipping insurance deal, every hedging instrument, it is built around the dollar. You're not just changing money. You're rewriting the entire system. Think of it like this. Imagine the entire world runs on one operating system. Now someone says, let's switch. Even if the new system is better, you still have a problem. Compatibility issues. Liquidity gaps. Trust deficits. That's exactly what's happening here. So countries don't quit the dollar overnight. They do something smarter. They start reducing dependence. Quietly. If you're starting to see the pattern hit, like, this isn't taught in school but it runs the world. Comment below. Do you think the dollar will still dominate in 10 years, or is a shift coming? China and Russia's strategy. Let's start with Russia. After sanctions, Russia had no choice. It began selling oil to China and India using Chinese yuan, Russian ruble. At the same time, Russia cut down its holdings of US treasuries. Now look at China. China isn't reacting. It's planning. It launched yuan-denominated oil futures contracts. It's pushing trade deals in yuan. It's building financial systems outside US control. Even some Gulf countries have explored pricing oil in yuan. That's a big shift. Because for the first time in decades, there's a serious alternative on the table. China is the world's largest oil importer. That gives it leverage. If you're selling oil, and your biggest buyer wants to pay in yuan, you listen. But hear the catch. Even countries trying to escape the dollar still depend on it. Why? Why even rivals still use the dollar? Because the dollar offers something no other currency fully can. Liquidity, stability, trust. You can move billions of dollars instantly. Without crashing markets. US financial markets are the deepest in the world. Legal protections are stronger. Contracts are more reliable. That's why even countries hostile to the US still use dollars when it's convenient. It's not loyalty. It's efficient. Even today, a large portion of global trade is still settled in dollars. Central banks hold massive dollar reserves. All markets still price primarily in USD. So what's happening isn't a revolution. It's a gradual shift. And gradual shifts are dangerous. Because most people don't notice them. Until it's too late. The future of the petrodollar. So where does this go next? There are three possible scenarios. 1. The system holds. The dollar remains dominant. Why? Because no alternative matches its scale. In this case, the petrodollar survives. The US keeps its financial power. Global system stays stable. 2. Slow fragmentation. This is already happening. Countries diversify. Some trade in yuan, some in euros, some in local currencies. The dollar weakens but doesn't collapse. Power becomes more distributed. 3. Sudden shock. This is the dangerous one. If a major crisis hits, oil supply disruption, war escalation, financial crisis, countries could be forced to switch faster than expected. That's when systems break. Now go back to where we started. Tensions with Iran. Threats to the Strait of Hormuz. Rising geopolitical instability. This isn't just about war. It's about control of oil supply, trade routes, currency dominance. Because whoever controls oil pricing influences the entire global economy. So ask yourself, if oil stops flowing smoothly, and countries stop trusting the dollar, what replaces it? And more importantly, who controls that system? For 50 years, the petrodollar hasn't just been a financial system. It's been a power structure. Invisible, efficient, dominant. But now, for the first time in decades, that structure is being tested. Not broken. Not yet. But tested. And in geopolitics, that's where change begins. If this made you rethink how the world actually works, subscribe. This channel doesn't follow headlines, it decodes power. Drop your take below. Will the dollar still dominate, or are we watching the beginning of the end? And if you want to understand what happens next, watch the next video, because what China is doing with gold might be even bigger than oil.